Good morning. When looking at First Thessalonians, one of the things I find interesting is, if you just start reading the book, you're going to get to chapter 2 and all of a sudden you're going to say, what is this chapter even doing here? Why is this chapter in the book? I mean, it's almost like in chapter 1, Paul saying, you guys are great, you're wonderful, your testimony's everywhere, and you get to chapter 2 and it's like, I didn't do it. And it's like, why did he have to do this? Well, there's a reason for it. It's because the people, if you remember, were attacking Paul and were following him around and were spreading all kinds of lies about him. It's not fun. My guess is, even though I don't think it's coming through directly, as a human being, Paul had to be angry about this. This had to be something that really got under his skin, because the fact is they were accusing him of all kinds of things that he was doing, none of which were true. One of the things that I remember that made quite an impression on my life was probably about, 8-9 years ago. I moved in, 10 years ago, Linda and I moved into our community. And about 8 or 9 years ago, in order to try to win an argument, somebody in our neighborhood decided to send out a letter and publicly accuse Linda, myself, and 2 other people of racism. I was angry. Not only that, in my case, the man, and he knew better, he was an attorney, he never should have done this. In my case, he said I was racist because of the things I posted on the community bulletin board and because of the things I said in public meetings. Which was interesting because I never made any statements at any public meetings, and to this day I have never yet posted on that community bulletin board. So how I made statements on the community bulletin board that were racist when I've never posted on it is a good question for me. In addition to that, Linda and I even got so bad we went to an attorney to say, what are our options? 2 other people went to a different attorney. And it was interesting because we had one white attorney and one black attorney. And both attorneys said the same thing to us. We came back and found out they both given the same advice. Number 1, this man has committed libel. There's no question. It's a slam dunk case. And number 2, don't even bother suing him because there's not a chance in the world you'll win in Prince George's County. And they said it's because simply, and I've seen this in person, in Prince George's County, due to jury nullification, you will never get a verdict of a black person doing something, calling a white person racist, and get a verdict against the black person. That's simply the reality of the county. Now I have to say this, that made me mad. That made me angry because I knew I had never done anything racist. I find racism offensive. Yet it got under my skin. I think maybe I had just a tiny little taste of what Paul was going through here. Because Paul was being accused of a lot of things he didn't do. Matter of fact, some of the things, just like me, how could I have done something racist when I had never even published something to the board? When he's saying, that's what I did. I think Paul was the same way, and that even more, he was being accused of all sorts of things he had never done. Now, when we look at this chapter itself, it's a little unusual in that instead of starting with his defense immediately, Paul starts with the results of what happened. If we look at verse 1, it says, "For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain." So Paul starts off by saying, not that he's defending himself, but hey, when we got there, things worked out. And not only that, if you look at the Thessalonians, look at what he said before that with the Thessalonians. They proved the value of Paul's message. I mean, these Thessalonians, these people were in the game. These people weren't bench warmers. They were people that their reputation was going all throughout the land saying, these people are following Jesus Christ. So Paul's saying to start with, look, what I did was of value. And then he goes on to say in verse 2, "But after we had already suffered and been mistreated in Philippi, as you know, we had the boldness in our God to speak to you the gospel of God amid much opposition." So what he's saying is, not only was Paul faithful in giving the gospel out, but that if you look when it talks about what happened in Philippi, let's take a look at what actually did happen in Philippi. Right before coming to Thessalonica, Paul went to Philippi. And when he went there, basically he cast out a demon, and when he cast out the demon, the people got angry because the girl could no longer tell fortunes, which makes sense. It was the demon telling the fortunes. They were going to lose money. So they stirred up the people and they caused a riot, and they publicly beat Paul, and they did all sorts of things they shouldn't have done, and they got him arrested. And they threw him into the cell, and they put him in the deepest part of the prison. And you've probably heard the story about the doors bursting open at midnight and the earthquake, the Philippian jailer. But here's what's interesting about all this. What's interesting is, in the morning, the people knew that they had done something wrong. The leaders knew they had done something wrong. And then they were terrified because they found out Paul was a Roman. You've heard the expression, it's nothing to lose your head over. This was something to lose your head over. You did not beat a Roman publicly, and you did not take a Roman into prison without some kind of a trial. He was a Roman citizen. The leaders of that town could have been in big trouble. So what'd they do? They sent their emissary in, and the emissary said, "You're free to go. Go on out. Sneak out the back." Paul was like, "No way. You took us in public, you're releasing us in public." So Paul was not making friends in Philippi. But the fact is, despite the beatings, Paul wouldn't shut up, which is a good thing in this case. He still delivered the gospel. He wasn't going to stop. If you look at what happened to Paul after Thessalonica, but before he wrote the book, he went to Athens. Athens put him up on Mars Hill. Athens let him speak publicly. But there was an indifference there. And the reason was because in Athens, they weren't letting him speak because they thought the resurrection was a wonderful thing. It was because he was a curiosity. As a matter of fact, they called him an uncultured babbler, basically. And that, he just sort of this unrefined guy, but boy, he's interesting. Let's put him up there kind of like a clown almost. So he didn't get a good response in Athens also. And all through this, remember, after Thessalonica, he had a band of people following him from Thessalonica, spreading lies and stirring up trouble everywhere he went. So Paul was still preaching the gospel in much opposition, and there was still results. Now's where Paul gets to the point where he starts talking about, hey, this isn't fair, the things that have been said about me. If we look in verse 3, it says, "For our exhortation does not come from error or impurity or by way of deceit." Again, there's no reason to say that unless you're being accused of those things. I believe Paul was being accused of all three of those things. And why does he list all three, error, impurity, or deceit? Well, for one thing, you can actually make an error. We can make an error and not be lying. I can tell somebody that I live in Denver, Colorado. And if I didn't know any better, it wouldn't be a lie. The fact that I know better and I know I actually live in Bowie, it would make it a lie. But the fact is, error is something where you don't know you're telling something wrong, but it's still wrong. But the intent's not there to deceive somebody. But he's saying, look, I'm not coming to you in error. This is God's word. In addition to that, he's saying, I'm not coming to you in impurity, bad motives. When Paul was around, there was a lot of times when Paul wasn't the only person to come to this town, I'm sure, and start preaching a new gospel. There was a lot of people going around preaching, but not about Jesus Christ. They had their own motives, and this is going on for centuries. This wasn't something new. New person comes in, we got a new religion, let's listen to him, see what to do. But a lot of these people would come, and they were there because they wanted to make money, they wanted fame, they wanted whatever it was, they had their own motives. And Paul was saying, I did not come to you with impure motives either. You know better than that. And the third thing he says is, I did not come to you by way of deceit. That's flat out lying. And I'll tell you something. So one of the things I think that we all know today is we've actually come to the point in our society where we kind of expect lying and it's okay. And up here, I'm not going to endorse political candidates. I don't do that. But when candidates do things that I can't help but use as sermon examples, I'll use them as sermon examples. And when I look at both sides, I look at a guy like Donald Trump. And it's funny because when I looked at what he actually says recently, a couple of organizations did this, they found that 70 to 75% of all the things he said in the speech were flat out lies. Documentable lies. He'd say one thing, no, he looked it up, that's not true. 70 to 75%. And that's and not only that, it's funny to watch him, it's almost like, if you look in psychological terms, it's almost like projection. The liar calls everybody else a liar to try to spread it around. But not to just hone in on Republicans here. If you look at the other side of the coin, no matter what you think about Benghazi, for example, whether you think it was good or bad or whatever, with the documents that have come out now, one thing is clear. Hillary was lying. She knew better and was flat out lying to people, especially the victims' families. But my point isn't so much even that they're lying. It's like, We've come to expect this. We've come to accept this. Oh, it's just politicians. They always lie. What's the big deal? We shouldn't be accepting that. And what Paul was saying here is, you can't accept that I came in a lie either, because if I came by a lie, everything I said is wrong. Paul was not lying. Paul was saying, I did not come by deceit. Paul was not your typical politician walking into town. He wasn't your typical preacher who had some impure motives. So already here you can see Paul is starting to defend himself. And not only that, contrast that to things like the trial of Jesus. What did they do with the trial of Jesus? They not only went out and got witnesses and brought him in, they paid him to say lies. They knew he didn't do the things he said. But what did they do? They said, we're going to go against them. We're going to pay people to lie about Jesus. Lying has become so much a part of our culture. And it's not just as funny. I say our culture. It was obviously a part of their culture back then too. That it almost became acceptable. Paul was saying it wasn't acceptable, that he came for a different purpose. And we look in verse 4. He said, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak not as pleasing men, but God, who examines our hearts. Can you think of any statement of higher praise than that I have been approved by God? I don't know about you, but that's the ultimate to me. Approved by God, don't care what men said. Period. Doesn't make any difference. And not only approved by God, but that the gospel, do you ever think about the fact that when you tell the gospel, even when you don't tell it, when you've been given the gospel, you have been given a treasure? That's what he's talking about here. That they have been entrusted with the gospel. You don't entrust things to people that don't have any value. The gospel is a treasure. It's to be guarded, but also to be shared. And the point is, a lot of times we don't think of the gospel as treasure. How often do you think about the precious treasure? You got gold, you got silver, you got stocks, you put them in a safe, you take care of them, you look after them. Do we think that way about the gospel? Do we think about the fact that the gospel has to be maintained and nourished within us so that we can share it with other people and actually be part of the game? Not just sitting on the sidelines saying, let's let everybody else witness, let's let everybody else tell about Jesus. No, the gospel is a treasure. And that's what Paul was telling them is, I came and was approved by God to give you this treasure. I don't know about you, but if I could leave life with the statement, he came, gave the treasure, and was approved by God, that'd be a pretty good ending. I'm hoping it doesn't happen today, but it'd be a pretty good ending. The point is, that was what Paul was saying, is I haven't come lying to you. None of that is true. We also see in verse 4 that he did not come to please man, but came to please God. You ever think about the fact that if we only please man, we deny God? I don't mean that we have to be offensive to people. I don't mean that we can't be part of the world as far as living in the world. But if our goal is to please man, we're not going to share the gospel. We're not going to invest ourselves in other people's lives. You know something? The easiest way to live is just to sit down, have fun, enjoy yourself, and not share the gospel. Because every time you share the gospel, you're taking a chance of out there putting yourself out and somebody saying, I don't think so much of you anymore. I don't like you. Don't pressure me. You're narrow-minded. All the different things we can hear. The fact is that we have a choice. We're going to please God or we're going to please man. And Paul was saying, I made that choice. Did it make Paul popular? Paul had bands of people following him from city to city talking about how rotten he was. Did it make Paul popular in Philippi? I don't think so. But the fact is, Paul made a choice and Paul said, I'm going to follow God no matter what the price is. In verse 5, he starts talking about the message itself and what he said about it. And it says, for we never came with flattering speech, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness. I love the word flattering speech in this because I think of, in our own expression, kissing butt, whatever, trying to work your way up. But the one thing I think of with flattering speech is, have you ever watched the U.S. Senate in action? I mean, you got guys that would cut each other's heart out for a quarter in that place. And they're sitting up and standing there when they disagree and they're saying, well, I'd like to disagree with my distinguished colleague from the great state of, and it goes, I'm not exaggerating, they really say that kind of stuff. Have you ever watched a parliamentary session of another country? Even Canada or England, which we consider, high society type things. Oh, they're not getting up like, they're getting up, well, the moron over there, you're not going to believe how stupid he is. And you think I'm kidding? They throw things at each other. They have fist fights in some of these parliament. Go look on the web, you'll find the videos. I'm not kidding. You know something though? As ugly as it gets in a lot of these parliaments, in some ways I've got more respect for them than I do for the U.S. Senate. Because I'd rather have somebody being straight with me. I'd rather have somebody come up to me and say, you're ugly. That's fine. We can deal with that now. We can talk about that. Maybe they're right. I don't care. The point is that I'd rather have somebody be honest with me. U.S. Senate, not honesty. I listen to them for 5 minutes at most, and I'm just like, it turns my stomach. I can't watch them anymore. Parliaments of other countries, they can be fun to watch. Tune in. Some of these off stations have them. When you see one, tune in and watch what they say sometime. It's really amazing to watch them. But the fact is, Paul was not coming with flattery. And flattery it's just vain flattery. It's meaningless. And on top of that, Paul was saying, I'm not here with greed. I didn't take anything from you. You can't possibly accuse me of being greedy. And not only did he not take anything, he said, God is witness. And again, if God knows the truth, hopefully that's enough for us. The fact is, God was his witness that he never took anything. And they knew it too. If we continue on, it said, nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, even though as apostles of Christ we might have asserted our authority. Pretty simple here. Paul was not there for pride. I have to admit, if I came into a town in that day and age and was coming into town with a message from God, there might be a tendency to stand up and say, yep, I got God. Here to give you a message. That's not what Paul did. And I hope I wouldn't do that. But hey, we've all got human tendencies. Instead, what Paul said is, I didn't come for my own glory. I came because the message was important, because you needed to hear about Jesus Christ. I didn't come for my own glory. And not only that, the message was not watered down. One of the problems we have today often is that we can take the gospel. But when we take the gospel, are we watering it down? Now, I'm okay with customizing the gospel to certain groups so they understand it. But I'm not okay when we water down the message of the gospel. There's different ways to reach people, but we can't change the core message. One of the things I will never forget, one of the things that concerns me is when I see seeker churches. And I'm not saying all seeker churches are bad. I've seen some good ones. But the majority of the seeker churches that I have seen either hide the message or cut the message out in order to be seeker churches. Matter of fact, some of them will hide it deliberately so they don't offend people. I will never forget going to one church that used to preach the Bible fairly clearly. And Linda and I tried them out, 6, 7, 8 years ago, whenever it was. And we went there for one service, and the entire sermon was on World War II fighter races and astronauts, because the guy loves flying. That was the sermon. That was it. Didn't mention it. Read the Bible beforehand, but never linked it to the Bible or anything else. 20 minutes about astronauts and fighter races. I got to admit, as somebody who enjoys airplanes, it was kind of interesting in some ways, but I was a little disappointed, needless to say. A couple nights later, Linda wasn't home. I hear a knock on the door. There's 2 women standing at the door. They're from this church. Oh, we just want to come by and visit you. What do you think of our church? Looked at him and said, I didn't like it. What do you mean you didn't like it? How can you say that? I said, you're not preaching the gospel. You're not teaching God's word. You're not doing any of these things. And you know what they said to me? Well, we made a decision a year or 2 ago that we weren't going to share the gospel on Sundays. We would teach God's word on off nights, like Wednesdays or Fridays when people came. But we didn't want to offend people, so we wanted to bring them into the church first. That's hiding the message. And what Paul was saying was, I'm not going to hide the message. I'm not going to water it down. The message is important. That's the treasure that we've been given. But on top of that, not only was he not coming in pride and not watering down the message, he also was saying at the end of this, we might have asserted our authority. Well, that was a tough one to say. The fact is that Paul could have come in and said, I am an apostle. Treat me like an apostle. Put me up on a pedestal. He didn't do any of that. Not only that, he could have said, pay me. He didn't do any of that. And not only that, it was customary for speakers in that day for other religious things, other religious groups, to come in and try to do that. They would come in as authorities that would come up on top of the pedestal. You want to tick somebody off sharing the gospel, come to them and tell them how much of an authority you are on the gospel. It doesn't really work. You want to share the gospel, you're with that person. Now, I call them, I've used this term before, but I call them gospel bombs. You come in and you just, I'm the authority, accept in Jesus or believe or die. That's not very effective. But there's better ways, and we're going to see that with Paul. In verse 7 he says, but we prove to be gentle among you as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. What he was saying was he didn't just bring the message, he poured himself into the people. He was tender, he was kind. The fact is, if you cut the message out and don't bring the word, it's no good. By the same token, if you only bring the word and shove it down somebody's throat without caring about that person, it's not going to be effective. The word plus caring is how we get the message out of the gospel. The fact is that historical examples. Anybody know, if you know much about the Spanish Inquisition, oh, that was a beautiful one. All you got to do is say exactly what we tell you to say and we'll let you live. Otherwise, we're going to kill you. How are they going to kill you? Burn you at the stake, run, bamboo through your fingers, whatever. I wouldn't kill you, but the point is, they were torturers, they were killing. You hear about all these torture, all these killings, that's Spanish Inquisition. Believe or die. And you know what happened? A lot of people would say, you got it, I believe. Do you really think that was a true conversion for the gospel? And not only that, the Catholic Church doing that anyway. But the point is that do you really think that was a true conversion for the gospel? Of course not. It's funny, early this week, Eric and I had the privilege of going down to the district meeting for the various elders and pastors in the Grace Brethren district we're in. And we had a great time. And one of the things, we broke up into small groups, and one of the things me and another guy from over in Alexandria were talking about is youth ministries. And one of the things and I mentioned this also with VBS coming up, and I think that's a good thing, okay? I think youth ministries are wonderful in general. But there's also something we forget about is how many times we've seen youth ministries where you get captive kids and they shove the gospel down their throats and then tell them, now you want to believe in Christ, don't you? I do. And what happens is you get a whole bunch of kids marching out of the youth ministries that don't have a clue about the gospel, that walk out not knowing any more than they did when they walked in, but have all said yes. And that's all it was. It was just basically putting a notch in the post, putting a score down on the scorecard. It's one of the reasons why I'm happy to see youth ministries here is because I don't think ours is going to be that way. I know the people running it, and I don't believe it's going to be that way. But the fact is, too many youth ministries are worried about the scorecard and not worried about the kids. You want to convert kids? Share with the kids, invest in the kids, then share the gospel with them. And I'm not saying don't share the gospel, but again, when we start forcing people into situations where we're able to get false conversions, that's not going to help anybody. If you look at verse 8, how did Paul do this? Having thus a fond affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. Did you ever think about pouring your own life into another person? That's how we reach people with the gospel. Again, it comes back, think of sports. Are you in the game? Are we in the game? Or are we sitting on the bench? Last week when I heard about Jane's friend that became a Christian, what happened was she was telling me it wasn't something where she suddenly went up and gave her a gospel grenade. She was friends with her. She talked with her. She read the Bible. She prayed for her. That's how we bring people to Christ. Obviously, it's God that makes the final decision, but that's how we witness effectively. We're not going to witness effectively unless we're also willing to put our lives into people and pour our lives into people just like God did. One of the things I remember, when you talk about, he says, real affection. When I was growing up, I had a great relationship with my dad. He could have told me anything and I would have listened and obeyed and done whatever he said. But you know something? He took me fishing. 5, 6 years old, we were outside playing catch, playing wiffle ball, playing football, playing whatever. He taught me chess when I was about 6 or 7 years old. When I was about 8 years old, he taught me bridge. And even though most adults wouldn't want to play with an 8-year-old kid, by the time I was 10 or so, I was playing with other adults. The point is, he always, and not only that, he talked to me like I was an adult. He'd talk to me about issues of the day when I was 8 years old. He didn't treat me like a nobody. We had a good relationship because he invested his life in me, because he showed his true affection. Because of that, when I heard him talk about Jesus Christ, it was easy to believe and listen. It was the type of thing where if you're not willing to pour your life into someone else, you're probably not going to see results from the gospel. And you're probably going to be wondering, why didn't God want to use me? Because it starts with investing in other people's lives. With little things. But it may start with taking a kid fishing. It may start with anything like that, but the fact is, that's where it starts. If you look at verse 9, Paul continues. Remember, this is all in the context of Paul saying, this is an invalid criticism, they're lying about me. In verse 9 it says, "For you recall, brethren, our labor and hardship, how working night and day so as to not be a burden to any of you, we proclaim to you the gospel of God." What's interesting is, first thing I see is the expression working night and day. That wasn't normal in that time. Normally you get up early, you work with the sun, you work till it gets dark, you go to, you eat your meals, you do whatever. But the light of day was typically when the workday was. Well, Paul was at certain times preaching and teaching, and at certain times doing something else. Whether this was tent maker time, whether this was something else, we don't really know here. But the fact is, he was working and earning his keep so that he would not be a burden to them. That's a wonderful way to do it, especially when you're reaching out to non-believers. One of the mistakes that we make frequently is we expect non-believers to contribute to our ministries. That's not the way it works. Even when we take an offering in a church, it's for the believers to contribute. If a person's a visitor, we don't expect them to contribute. We don't want them to contribute. Not that we wouldn't use their money, but the fact is, it's not their responsibility. One of the other guys at this conference earlier in the week was talking to me down in the Mechanicsville Grace Brethren Church. And he was telling me, I think it's wonderful. You know what their offering is? He said, visitors come in and 3-4 weeks later, they'll say, "Don't you guys take an offering?" "Yeah, it's the bucket in the back of the church. It's the box in the back of the church." They don't pass offering plates. If you're a believer and you're part of that church, you know where to put the money. If you're not, you don't even worry about it. It's a wonderful way to do things. I'm not saying we should convert to that necessarily, but the point is, the fact is that they're not relying on non-believers to fund their ministry. When Paul went into Thessalonica, he didn't go in and say, "I've got this wonderful treasure, therefore you should pay me money so that I can present it to you." He didn't take a dime from them. Didn't take a dime from the Thessalonians because they were not believers when he arrived. If you look at verse 10, Verse 10 says, "You are witnesses, and so is God, how devoutly and uprightly and blamelessly we have believed toward you believers." Once they became believers, here he's talking now. And what he's saying is, you've seen it and God's seen it. Again, if God is the witness and the believers around you are the witness, who cares what else is said? When he says blameless, it comes to mind also, because think about this. How many ministries have you seen destroyed by pastors or ministers who are willing to do things that are outside what God wants? Your famous ones like Jim Bakker, Jimmy Swaggart, things like that. It wasn't even part of the gospel. It was things they did elsewhere outside the gospel, and all of a sudden, entire ministries destroyed. When I was very young, I actually spent part of a summer in Dominica, West Indies, doing summer missionary work. Didn't have a clue as to what I was doing, but went anyway. And one of the things that the pastor down there told us is there were all kinds of missionaries that would come to that island. All kinds of missionaries. And most of them within 2 or 3 years were gone. The reason? Because they'd end up sleeping with local women, usually leaving their wives or cheating on their wives. That destroys a ministry because your actions... think about this. If you knew someone and that person came to you and you knew that person was an adulterer, or worse, that person was a rapist or something, and they said to you, "Let me tell you about Jesus and how he can change your life," you'd probably laugh in his face. Remember, Paul was saying here, there's nothing that I did that anyone can blame me for outside of my life, outside of the gospel. When we are out in the world, they will watch what we do. If you do things that are unacceptable morally, they're not going to listen to you when we try to tell them the gospel. And they have a good reason not to listen to. I mean, after all, if you got a knock on the door and you heard, "Hi, I'm here from Adulterers for Christ. Can I talk to you for..." No way. Are you kidding me? Ain't going to happen. The fact is that our reputation makes a difference. We go into verse 11 and it says, "Just as you know how we were exhorting and encouraging and imploring each one of you as a father would his own children." Again, the analogy first to the mother who's giving of herself, now to the father. And again, just like with my own father, when you get that encouragement, when you get that exhortation, you listen. It changes you. It changes your attitude. And that's how we can win non-believers to the Lord. Now in verse 12, he finally comes around to say, what is the reason for all of this? What is the calling? And the answer is, so that you may walk in a manner worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Wow, that's quite a mission. Walk in a manner worthy of God. And not only that, the first thing to notice is he said walk. He didn't say sprint. Many of us, it's easy to do. We get up one morning, I'm going to serve Christ today. And that lasts till about 3 in the afternoon. And let's face it, things start happening in the world. And it's easy to get distracted. And I do it myself. I'm not blaming anybody. But the fact is, sometimes we look at things as a sprint. It's not a sprint. It's a walk. A walk that starts the moment we become a believer and stops the day God calls us to glory. And through that entire walk, we have to be looking at how do we serve God? How do we glorify God? How can we be consistent in how we glorify God? And not only that, again, what is the calling? To walk worthy of God. I can't think of anything that's a higher calling. That we will glorify him and we will share the gospel. And not just share the gospel, but among ourselves also, we will make disciples of each other. By training, by sharing with each other. By growing. That's what he wants. And he wants us to focus on glorifying God through all of this. It's easy to get a standard of comparison when we start looking at how do we compare ourselves to men. It's easy for me to say, you know something? I never crossed anybody on a double yellow line like the idiots in my community do all the time. I know they do. Trust me. Not only it's 25 mile an hour zone, there's curves in it, and I got guys, crossing that double yellow line and speeding by me doing 70 miles an hour in a 25 zone on a blind curve. It happens usually every week or two anyway in my community. And I could very easily go home and I could say, now I do go home to Lynn and I say, you're not going to believe what this idiot just did. But I could very easily go home and think of myself as superior to them. Now my actions may be better than them, but I'm not superior to them. The fact is that not only that, I can't look at that and say, because I'm better than that guy, I'm okay. I got to compare myself to God's standard. That's the standard we need to be looking at. Are we living up to what God has called us to? Are we walking worthy of God? Now again, as we usually do, we've looked at the interpretation. Quickly, we want to look at the application of this. Number one, if we share the gospel will produce results, period. Now, they're not always going to be the results you think they are. Sometimes it's going to be people coming to Christ. Sometimes it's going to be people thinking about it. Sometimes it's going to be people that are just plain ticked off at you and don't want to hear it. Sometimes it's going to look like there's no results. I'm not saying the results are always going to be what you want them to be, but the gospel changes lives one way or another. Sometimes it hardens people when they hear it. Sometimes it softens people. But the fact is, by presenting the gospel, people will change and things will happen. The gospel is not our words, it's Christ's words. And that's what we have to remember, it's God's words. Not only that, the other thing that I would say is this. As far as the gospel producing results, if you are living a consistent life that shows the gospel through your life, watch what happens when a non-believer around you has a crisis. I bet it happen. Who do they turn to? Do they turn to their unbelieving pals? Usually not. It's funny, a while back, I had to correct him a little bit and say, no, that's not really true, but I had one guy that I know walk up to me and say, you're a holy man, aren't you? I need advice. He was having some struggles he was going through. I said, well, technically, I wouldn't use those terms. I know what you're saying, but no, I'm no better than you are, but I'm saved by Jesus Christ. And then we got a great chance to talk. But the fact is, the reputation he knew brought him to me when he had a crisis. And it was a crisis. The fact is, if you watch around you, the odds are you've had it happen before. When something goes wrong, people are going to come, and people are going to come to you when something goes wrong, if you're living a Christ-like life. The next thing is that we are going to have challenges to spread the gospel. Paul suffered, we're going to suffer if we're spreading the gospel. One of the things I remember is Lynn and I enjoy vacations, and nothing wrong with vacations. One of the ones I remember in particular was we did a 10-day Southern Caribbean cruise, and we did it on the Sun Princess, and we had the suite on the back of the boat. It was 1,000 square feet. It had a balcony that was wonderful with tables and lounge chairs all over it. We had a marble bathroom with a separate bathroom. We had a jacuzzi tub. We had a glass shower in it. It was all finished in beautiful woods. It was a wonderful suite. Now, the reason I bring that up is there's nothing wrong with doing that, especially because it was a really good deal. And you know the way I am with points. But the point is that even though it was wonderful, I can't very well say, yeah, I was really suffering it. No. The fact is, there are some things that we do that aren't suffering. Now, admittedly, I still looked for people to witness to on that cruise. But the fact is, we've got to be willing to not only take the cruises on the suites on the boat, we've got to be willing to clean up the vomit when the person next to us throws up. That's when you tell if somebody loves you. Not if they'll go on a cruise. Hey, you want to go on a cruise on a suite on a ship? Yeah, I'll go. That's not hard to get people to do that. What happens when somebody near you has cancer and needs help? What happens when somebody just has the flu and is throwing up and can't do anything about it? Those are where people are going to see whether we love Jesus Christ or not. And it's funny, for me, I can't even hold myself up as a wonderful example. I try to do that. Frankly, I have other things I have to do, including preparing for this. But the fact is, each one of us, we're going to be judged not just on whether we're preaching the gospel, I don't mean by Christ, but by other people around us, not just on the gospel. We're going to be judged by people basically on, are we willing to put out our lives for them? Are we willing to do the things? Are we going to do the things that we enjoy all the time, or are we going to be willing to work as well? Not saying you can't enjoy your work, but the fact is, sometimes work isn't fun. Sometimes you got to do things. I have never once cleaned up vomit and said, oh boy, vomit. I've done it a number of times, but I've never enjoyed it. But you know something? Sometimes it needs to be done to show somebody you care about them. The other thing too is, do we have pure motives? Each one of us has to examine this. Are we out for vanity? Are we out for pride? Are we telling people? One thing I remember years ago, one of the local churches here, every Sunday they had a bus ministry and they would run ads. We had 2,175 kids in Sunday school. They always had over 2,000 usually. And all I could think of is, how much do they care about the kids and how much do they care about the number in the Washington Post every Sunday? Because a lot of things I saw on, believe it or not, there used to be dirty tricks in bus ministries. Things like, little tricks like sending the bus 5 minutes ahead of the other church's bus and telling them their bus broke down and this is a substitute bus. You think I'm kidding? That actually happened in this area. They wanted numbers more than they wanted to act honestly and with integrity. It was pride. One of the things I will never forget is sitting for a number of hours, a guy that I knew, sitting and talking to a guy who came from one of the richest families in the history of the United States. He was one of the sons, one of the half-brothers of guys that owned sports franchises. His own house was out in Potomac, out on River Road, and I mean, it was literally 3 stories tall, the size of a football field. Amazing wealth. And he was trying to give away money. But you know what the condition was? All they had to do was build a statue to him in the middle of whatever they built. He couldn't get anybody to take his money. His motive was pride. His motive was vanity. Now, I bring that up because honestly, how many of us sometimes are doing things out of vanity or pride instead of a pure motive for the gospel? How many of us are doing it to look good as opposed to really caring about a person and sharing with that person? If we want to look at our motives, my suggestion is the standard we need to look at is approved by God. You hit that standard, we're okay. We're not going to have any problems at all if we're approved by God. It's funny. It's not just, if you think of approved by God, even in earthly terms, if you're married, you're going to understand what I mean, okay? If I'm doing something and Linda's happy, whatever the rest of you guys think, that's okay. Okay? If Linda's happy, I'm happy. If you've got a spouse, you know what I mean. If that spouse is happy with you and approves of what you're doing, things are going to be okay. If that spouse is not happy, you're not going to be okay. Well, now think of it this way. Each one of us has a relationship to God the Father if we are a believer in Christ. If we're keeping God happy with our actions, doesn't matter what men say about us. Hey, Paul was accused of a lot worse things than I've ever been accused of. Doesn't matter. That's what matters is, can we say approved by God? Not only that, who are we trying to please? Are we trying to please men or are we trying to please God? If we're trying to please men, we're doomed to failure from the start. I don't mean be unfriendly, but what I mean is our goal shouldn't be to have a high seat in society. The other thing here is a little bit difficult now. Investing in lives. This requires effort. And I have some suggestions, not just theoretical here. How many times have you invited non-believers to your house? One thing I heard this past week was, one guy was talking about how he was so happy because his wife would see these 2-for-1 coupons and grab 2-for-1 at the grocery store. And he'd say, great, we're saving money. And he'd go look in the refrigerator and it's gone. What happened? There's only one there. Oh, I gave one to the neighbor. That's how she was ministering to people, was she'd see 2-for-1 things and give one away. Not to believers, to non-believers. To make an effort to become part of their lives. Not only that, you want easy stuff? Hey, when there's a football game on, invite somebody over. Unless they're a Dallas fan or an Eagle fan, that's another story. No, even Eagles and Dallas fans, okay? Yeah, sorry, Eric. Anyway, the point being is that invite somebody over for the game. If you like baseball, so I guess baseball season now, invite somebody over to the game. These are easy things to do, but they're investments in people's lives. And people are going to listen to us with the gospel if we first befriend them. And I don't mean just like they're targets either. I mean a real friendship, a real concern about their life. The other thing we've got to look at as far as how we can apply this is money. There's a lot of churches around that do what we call the prosperity gospel. You give me more and more money and you will become rich. God will give you money. There are some churches in this area within 10 miles of us that are drawing over 10,000 people a Sunday that are preaching prosperity gospel. The goal of a person preaching in a church should not be to become rich off that church. In our case, it's easy. The elders, we don't take anything. But the fact is that if you're in a church, and even not just the preachers, but I mean, if you're in the pews and you're going to your neighbors and you're trying to turn a profit off of this somehow, with the gospel, there's a problem. The fact is, prosperity gospel is wrong. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to pay a pastor, okay? What I am saying is, and it's wonderful if you don't have to. One of the things I can say in my own life, you'd be surprised how many chances I've had to witness when I've told people what I do. And their first attitude, and you can tell, and they start saying, well, you know, all the preachers, all they want is money. Really? Don't take a dime. You'd be amazed how many witnessing opportunities that's opened up. It's been great. But the fact is that we should not be a burden to the unbelievers. We should be a help to the unbelievers. We should also, in the church, we should never be asking unbelievers to contribute to our ministry. I've seen this many, many times where churches will go out and have fundraisers and they want the unbelievers to contribute to the spreading of the gospel. Why? It's not their thing. Unbelievers shouldn't be contributing to that. The gospel is free. That's how we need to reach unbelievers. The final application I have here is to talk about our walk and God's expectation. When we live our life should be a reflection of what our beliefs are and a reflection of our relationship with Jesus Christ and with God the Father and with the Holy Spirit who indwells us. The fact is, it's our walk and our work should reflect all of that. Somebody should be able to look at, have you ever had somebody come up to you? I have. Have people come up to you and say, are you a Christian? And it's not because you've ever shared the gospel. It's because they've looked at your life and they've said, there's something different about that person. It's wonderful when it happens. On the other side of the coin, when there's hypocrisy, people see it. I mean, hey, let's face it. When we see somebody who's a hypocrite, we know it. We spot it. Do we want anything to do with them? No. Are we going to be able to share the gospel with them? Of course not. If we live our life and we have our walk to reflect what God is in our relationship with God, we're going to be able to share the gospel and see results. What we have to look at is, when we do something, are we glorifying God? We talked about Ephesians 1 before, with the purpose of every believer is to glorify God. Are we edifying and building the church? Are we glorifying God? That's funny. One of the things I've mentioned before is the idea of ordination, how pastors get ordained. Now, several of us here have been through ordination just for professional reasons, so that we can marry people and things like that. But I'm always nervous about that, because my question is, are you telling me there's someone who's a believer in Christ who's not ordained? Because ordination is setting someone apart for a special purpose. If you're not set apart for a special purpose, you're not a believer. The moment you become a believer, God has a purpose for you. No such thing as a believer without a purpose. Every believer has a gift from the Holy Spirit for use in edifying the church, period. Every single believer, no exceptions. So again, I get a little nervous with this ordained thing, because even though I've done it for professional reasons, I hate to see something that separates us, because every single one of us is ordained, and that ordination should be reflected in our walk with Christ. What I have to say to you in closing is, what's your purpose? What's your gift? Are you living a life that people are going to be able to look at you and say, yeah, I want to hear what that person has to say? It's kind of a challenge, because you know something? It's not easy to do. It's sticking yourself out there. But within the church and outside the church both, are we making friends with unbelievers and sharing the gospel? And within the church, are we discipling and building up the people around us? That's kind of what all this is about. Not only is Paul saying, I didn't do this stuff, but he also is pointing out what he did do that was appropriate. Let's go ahead and close in prayer.